learning about an entirely new, really market. One of the biggest blockers that you talked about is consumer acceptance of this sort of technology into their food. So can you talk a little bit about what you guys do?
Yes, so this tends to raise a lot of questions, so I'll just start by saying a little bit more about New Harvest and cellular agriculture. New Harvest is a nonprofit. It's based here in New York, and what we do is we fund open research in growing foods, materials, and ingredients from cell cultures that you would normally source from an animal, but instead of growing a whole animal and slaughtering it to get the protein or material that you might be looking for, the idea is that you could grow the exact cell and tissue from cell cultures or by engineering yeast to produce the particular protein. And so in the earlier days, we started off in kind of the startup world where we launched 2 startups, one of which Rachel mentioned, Perfect Day Foods. We also launched a startup called Clara Foods, which is doing egg white proteins from yeast cultures. And since then, we've realized that there is so much more work to be done on the cultured meat side. And we were kind of putting out messaging in the hopes that some funder out there would start funding academic research, but that just wasn't happening. And so we needed to be the change that we wanted to see in the world. And so we ourselves started directing donor funds, funds from Food Tank InVivo, which we're very grateful for, towards this research and making it open and accessible to everybody. And that touches on the trust aspect that you were asking about, because people understandably get wary when science is applied to food, and we've seen examples of the reactions to GMO and things like that. And it's lucky that we have the hindsight to look at some of the mistakes that were made and to be able to speak with people who are very frank about their experiences on the industry side and on the other side. And so we have realized that open and honest communication, science-based communication, and open access to the research, collaboration, and all of those things are so important if we're to make this a reality. So,
and a little bit closer to home, and a different sort of innovation that I guess should be thought of as a little more traditional is urban agriculture, in that it's you have a more traditional way of growing food, but it's right here in the city. What are some of the kind of misconceptions you hear about the way that urban agriculture fits into the general food system?
Sure. So for context, Square Roots is an urban farming campus and an entrepreneurship platform based in Brooklyn. So we have 10 40-foot shipping containers in a parking lot of an old factory in Bed-Stuy, and they're all outfitted to grow all sorts of fruits, vegetables, leafy greens, and herbs. It's a hydroponic growing system, and it's a vertical growing system. So no soil, and everything is grown along the walls of the shipping containers. The magic of this system is that each of the farms is run by a cohort of entrepreneurs in training. So they work with us for a year at a time, and they go through a very structured curriculum of farming, business, leadership, and community. So the way we like to look at it is we're arming the next generation of thought leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs in the food system. So, a couple misconceptions. Kind of like Erin said, there is some skepticism when science is applied to food. There's some view that in urban agriculture systems, the food is inferior in either quality or nutrient content compared to traditional field farming. To that, I would start with the taste of our food is just so intensely flavorful compared to what you're used to getting at the supermarket. I often compare, I do a lot of these tasting events, and when people are trying our food for the first time, it's like that scene in Willy Wonka when she's chewing gum and goes through like 7 different meals while she's chewing it. Because it's like, that's what arugula is really supposed to taste like. And a lot of that is because, we're growing everything out in Brooklyn, harvested on Mondays, and it's on your plate on Tuesday. And that's just not the case with what you're buying from the supermarket. So from a quality perspective, the ability for us to provide like hyper fresh local food really speaks to the quality of the product. Additionally, a lot of the food that we're used to seeing in supermarkets is grown or kind of changed to optimize for transit time. So, the typical apple might be coated in wax so that it looks nice to consumers and so that it holds up during the transit time. And obviously our food, and generally produce grown in urban settings does not have to go through those changes. The other thing that I would talk about is commercial viability and scale. There's a view that urban agriculture just can't compete on a scale level to traditional field farming. We don't have the space, we don't have acres and acres of farmland. And that's why you're seeing all of these new technologies popping up. So whether it's our vertical farming system or a lot of other aquaponics, hydroponics, and general indoor indoor farming technologies. I think we're relatively early days in that process compared to obviously field farming that's been around forever. But I think we're kind of at the cusp of a bunch of technological breakthroughs that will allow us to be producing enough to feed the billions of people living in urban settings in the next couple of decades.
So even with more exposure, I think that more and more people are interested in health and food and where the food comes from. It's still incredibly hard to figure out where your food is coming from. What would you say are some good, all three of you, some good rules to follow for everyday people just trying to make good, sustainable food choices?
We talk a lot about at Square Roots, if you know your farmer, you'll trust your food. And that's part of our approach, is to have these really high-touch, face-to-face relationships between the farmers, the people going through this entrepreneurship program, and the end consumer. And so I would encourage people to really develop relationships with as many people in kind of your personal food supply chain as possible, whether that's someone running a stand at a farmer's market or the butcher at the supermarket. Something I found, I come from a banking background, and people are not super excited to talk about their work in that world, and I'm not so passionate and proud of it. When you work in food, you're so excited to talk about what you're growing, producing, selling, etc. So I think that developing those personal relationships will allow you to kind of see transparency, sourcing, what are all the steps going on in the supply chain, what are the ingredients here. So developing those kinds of personal relationships, buying local, shopping local, eating seasonally.
If I can add to that, because I agree fully, is that one of the things that we've put in place is a local bar supermarket in France. What's interesting about it is that we do have the farmers actually come in and be able to talk with the shoppers, and so there's the making that connection that I think also helps then consumers themselves become a lot more aware of food, ugly food, and whether it's something that can no longer be eaten, and so they have to toss it, and that adds to the waste. Or on the contrary, realizing that now that I've spoken to this farmer and I know what that took from that farmer to produce this food, I'm actually going to take better care of it and really use it differently.
I have a pretty different answer in that we actually don't advocate for any one type of diet or another. A lot of people kind of look to New Harvest and expect us to be an organization that encourages meat reduction or veganism or vegetarianism, but we're kind of just nonpartisan on that. I do eat meat, but I have personally reduced my meat consumption, and I think that being a meat eater has helped us reach companies and individuals, farmers, and what I call the unusual suspects, and people who are interested in cellular agriculture but might not feel comfortable if they feel like they're going to be attacked or alienated because of their personal food choices. And I think that us being a nonprofit also gives us a lot of freedom in that we don't have a product to sell, and so we're not trying to convince anyone really that you should or shouldn't be eating cellular agriculture products. We're just doing the science that will support a future industry. So I personally don't really have a food philosophy, and I think that that's appropriate for what we're doing right now.
I completely agree on that note about meat. I'm a vegetarian myself, but I think that the production of meat has a really huge place in a sustainable food system, just not necessarily the way that the industrial system has it.
It also tastes so good.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to just take note of, like, if we're going to make products that are really competitive with meat from animals, there's just so much work to be done, and we haven't even really looked at taste yet. So.
And so all three of you guys and so many other people are doing incredible work to innovate in the food system and push for change every day. But what are some things that audience members can work into their everyday lives to help promote and work towards a more sustainable food system, maybe outside of going to the farmers market, which everybody should do?
Well, I guess I would put a little bit of responsibility on the consumer side to answer that question. I think that it is up to us to stop overbuying. it's up to us to think about new recipes and maybe, so if you do buy something seasonally, instead of thinking, okay, the same thing again because I'm in the same season, well, consider other spices or whatever, other recipes. There's so many that are at hand now with the branding of today. There's such a wealth of information in terms of helping make the ordinary extraordinary. And so consumers need to take it on themselves a bit.
Just touching on recipes, what we've had a lot of fun with at Square Roots is looking into recipes that might account for food that otherwise might be tossed, whether it's basil stems or carrot tops. There are all sorts of fun things that you can do with that. So kind of looking into innovative uses of what otherwise might be food waste. And I also, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I would really encourage people to be buying locally and eating seasonally. I think in New York City, we're used to being able to get whatever we want when we want it, whether that's, strawberries in January, avocado in February, and there are ways to get all that stuff. But there's an economic and an environmental cost to that, if you consider where all that food needs to come from. So eating seasonally, I think, is really important. The flip side of that, and this may be something that you guys are thinking about at New Harvest, is when you have these indoor farming systems, we don't have seasons, 365 days a year, it's controlled climate agriculture. So it's still eating locally, but we're growing strawberries year round that don't have to sit on the truck for 2 weeks before they get to you.
As a communicator of like a very weird application of science to food, my personal dream answer is that I wish that everyday people had more of an understanding of science so that it would be easier to translate some of these ideas and where the state of research is at, but that is very unlikely to happen. And so I think there is responsibility on groups like New Harvest and the companies that are hoping to put products out to communicate their work in ways that are honest and trustworthy and science-based. And it also, I think, if you're interested in the future of food and these kinds of novel applications of science to food, if you are in a position where you can educate yourself on the processes, it will really help in order to make an informed choice of whether it's something that you want to engage in or not.
So I know that you, Rachel, touched a little bit about food waste, and I was writing something this morning, so it's like raw statistics. And so a common thing that people know is that we waste a third of the food that the world produces just to feed ourselves. Like that's not really the food used to feed animals and things like that. And a lot of times we think about food waste, which is, by the way, that's enough to feed everybody that's hungry in the world times 6, which is incredible to me. So like we'd just be done solving hunger if we could just figure out food waste. But on top of that, like all this food will go to landfill and then they'll release methane, which is actually 27 times more potent of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So it's an enormous issue and also opportunity for change. Are there any kind of quick fixes you guys use at home to reduce food waste, maybe in the kitchen or in your everyday work?
As a New Yorker, I kind of just buy what I need that day.
Sure, yeah, I mean, composting, I don't know that we all have room for composting, but that's a big kind of productive way to use your food scraps. The recipes and kind of innovative uses of them, whether it's as a pester make for basil stems or juices or all sorts of other things that we can do. The other thing that I would point to as like another win for buying fresh local food is that, if you consider food to have a finite shelf life, it can either spend that shelf life sitting on a truck or it can spend it sitting in your kitchen. So, if it's something that you bought that was just harvested, it will last longer in your fridge and it will be a lower likelihood that you'll have to throw it away compared to buying something that's already 2 weeks old at a supermarket that, will go bad in your fridge after a couple days.
And otherwise, I guess I would come back to sort of the recipes things. In France, we have more and more offers with chefs who are going to just cook with wasted foods because there is so many things you can actually do with that. Stop taking food for granted quite so much. From the innovation side, but this isn't something that actually is out in the market yet, but there are tentatives of having other ways of guiding consumers. So for example, I saw a really interesting innovation where the packaging actually changes color when it starts to get closer to the expiration date, so that you also have visual cues within your refrigerator to let you know. And I'm sure that all of you have been hearing about the refrigerators that are smart refrigerators, who do also give you a little bit of a tap on the shoulder saying you better eat this soon. So we'll see, because we can't just outsource all of our responsibility to technology, but it is true that technology is currently being used to see if it can't bring us helpful reminders.
Very true, thank you. And then as 3 women working in the food system, and especially New Harvest is entirely women run, correct?
Our staff is all women.
That's incredible.
And a lot of your researchers.
Yes.
Yeah. So what are some, just end on some inspiring stories of women in agriculture that you're seeing today really making some changes? Besides Belle, of course.
Our head farmer at Square Roots is a woman in her late 20s, so she runs all 10 of our container farms. She oversees the entrepreneurs in training who are going through this program. So she has like her actual farming duties and then kind of teaching and coaching responsibilities as well. And she's so incredibly amazing and inspirational to me. I can't like keep plants alive. And she's just a genius, and she brings like this level of passion and energy to our business and to the farming side of our business. That I think is really, she sets a great example for this kind of cycle of entrepreneurs in training who are going through the program. I think in general, what Square Roots would like to do is kind of change up what you think of when you think of a farmer. So I think people's heads go to a certain, man of a certain age in the middle of the country, and we have a group of like 25-year-olds in Brooklyn who are also farmers too, and half of them are women. So I have a lot of fantastic examples of my coworkers, but I would also, our head farmer, Aranda, is just crushing it, so she's awesome.
As Rachel mentioned, we have a research fellowship program. So how we fund our research is that we give grants to master's and PhD students across the US, Canada, in the UK, and we would fund basically anywhere. So it's not limited to any of those countries. But when we first started funding our research, it just so happened that the first 4 fellows were female. And that raised these questions of, so are you guys also about advancing women in STEM? And it was actually very powerful to say no. That was actually a purely happy accident that all of those 4 fellows who we funded initially, their proposals were so strong and they were such great candidates that, of course, they received those grants just on their own merit. And eventually that fellowship grew to include 3 male fellows, and so it's a little bit more gender equal. But it's great that you don't have to have that agenda. It's just that when you recognize quality, the cream does rise to the top.
And if I can use 2 examples on 2 ends of the spectrum, one is that, as you may or may not know, the brunt of agriculture is actually done by women. Not so much in the northern countries, but certainly in all of Africa, South America, and Asia, it's generally women who are doing the work. And what has been fairly unfortunate is that oftentimes when they do the work, she's not necessarily the one then who actually gets her pay, and she's not necessarily the one who gets to make the decisions in terms of how she's going to nourish her children or send them to school or what have you. And I think that here again, technology, the way it can help it is we've seen a few different offers in sort of e-payments in Africa, for example, where suddenly when the woman is paid for her work, but it doesn't go in as cash in her hands, it just can be taken by another member of her family without naming any names, but actually remain within a kind of bank account, even if it's not a bank account, because oftentimes these people are not banked. Well, suddenly she's actually going to have a better livelihood thanks to agriculture. So that's one really sort of mass example. But then I have just a favorite woman that I'd like to mention. Her name is Lisa Dyson, and she's the CEO of a startup called Kyverdi. And what Kyverdi is doing is, so we've got, cellular farmers, we've got urban farmers, and in Kyverdi we've got microbial farmers. And so what's really interesting is all that microbes, and of course yeast, we mentioned it already, but that type of thing is actually going to give new alternatives to protein where instead of needing to ship soy across the world and necessarily soy that is GMO or what have you, actually we can use bioreactors to have alternative sources for protein. So, and that is just one more initiative in terms of food tech that is being led by a woman.
Thank you. And I think now we will open up the floor to questions. Yes, and thank you.
Hi, my name is Suma, also in the Urban Tax Space with Project. I'm curious if you project 50 years out for each of your spaces, what do you guys see happening? For 20 years, however easy or hard it is.
I'll give a very realistic answer, which is that I hope that in 20 years, cellular agriculture is a more established academic discipline. Like right now, we're just at that very early stage where we're trying to get students to graduate with masters and PhDs in this field, and there's not yet full degree granting programs in academic institutions, and there's not like a reliable, steady stream of expertise being produced. So that's a more realistic hope that we have, but of course we would also hope that products are more advanced and hopefully available on the market in some form or another.
Whether it's 20 or 50 years from now, I would love to see, right now Square Roots, we're just in Brooklyn, it's our one campus, and we would love to see campus in every city in the country. If not, we definitely have global aspirations. And we have 10 farms right now, each capable of growing about 50 pounds a week of food, but if you multiply that, there are some really significant potential impacts on how each of those cities eats, and to be up and running to have these vertical farming systems, indoor farming systems that are capable of growing. And right now, as I said, it's leafy greens and herbs, and then a couple like fun stuff that we're testing out, but we do have a whole menu of fruits and vegetables that we are able to grow in our farms. And we're working on kind of building and improving the technology to make those at a commercially viable level. So yeah, Square Roots in every city by then. But generally, systems in place that allow cities to eat fresh local food year round.
And in the traditional agriculture space, I would have to say that as a complement to these other ways and new solutions in the system, I have a strong hope for traditional agriculture, because all of these staple foods are not going to be done in indoor farming or in the labs. And so we need to get our act together, and we are. And so one example is using agroforestry for land degradation neutrality, where we actually, instead of saying that it's the agriculture that is reaping the soils and causing desertification, erosion, causing water pollution, actually agriculture becomes the solution. Agriculture is then what's going to help the soils be fertile anew. It's going to be what's going to help the water be polluted. So, we are currently working on we're innovating in Africa on some of these kinds of things with agroforestry. And I think that is a sign of the future.
I actually just add one more thing. Another thing that we talk about kind of long-term for the graduates of our program, so we're not just bringing in hourly paid labor to run the farms, we are teaching these people about agriculture, multiple systems of agriculture, and also business skills. So like we envision this world 20, 30, 50 years from now where all of our graduates have also gone off and done these amazing innovative things in the food system that we don't even know we need yet. So we really aim to have this big multiplier, we talked about having an exponential impact on the food system, and so hopefully we're kind of farming this next generation of food leaders and entrepreneurs.
Hi, my name is Isabella. For a long time, I feel like a lot of the large food corporations have kind of defined consumer taste and preferences. But I've seen that a lot of large corporations have kind of started buying smaller food brands that are innovating and creating all these new products. So I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts on whether that's kind of a help or a hindrance, and kind of what these big food corporations can kind of do to continue that innovation without destroying it in a way.
I guess I could see how you could make either argument. Are the smaller food brands as genuine if you have this kind of puppet master in the background? But I do kind of feel like we're all on the same team, in terms of revolutionizing the industrial food system. So, if that happens to mean that a small, really aspirational, innovative company is backed by, Pepsi or whatever, that's great. So, any change, any innovation, I think is moving in the right direction, and I'd say we're all on the same team.
I would agree. We don't see the meat industry and meat producers as an enemy, or we don't use the word disrupt anymore either. We hope that cellular agriculture will be just an option that consumers have, and that hopefully will include the larger companies and also smaller artisanal kinds of things.
Yeah, and I agree with what's being said, because I think that one of the words that I had put in my notes that I didn't mention was pleasure, right? And when it comes to eating, I mean, that's what that makes us live. And it's our sustenance, but it's also our nourishment. And so if we can have a greater diversity in terms of the types of food that we can discover, great. And if that means, though, that you need a certain level of means in order to make it happen, well, hey, if the big food companies are finally aware of that to help promote those new things, that's great for all of us.
Thank you. Let's have one more quick question.
Hi, my question is about access to food and food deserts and what we could be doing collectively to address that issue.
So I'll start. I think there really is this local aspect to things, because that way we don't have the environmental footprint of getting across the world, and we don't have to we don't have to pick things before they're mature for eating them so that they have their full amount of nutrients. So I think there's a real local aspect to the access. And the other thing is, I mentioned earlier the local bar supermarket that we're putting in place in France. What's neat about it is that it remains democratic. So instead of saying, okay, because oftentimes, you come to New York and you go to all these fancy places that have really local and special foods, and it's expensive, right? And we know that when I was mentioning earlier the obesity and undernourished but overfed, some of it is because people don't necessarily have the means to have access to all of these great foods. Whereas when you go to the local, then at least you're taking away the additional costs along that value chain. And so it's a way of making that still accessible to many different populations.
I'll start off with the caveat that we have a ton of work to do in that area, but we are building and improving a technology that can literally just be plugged in and start growing food anywhere. We're small right now, we have 10 of these containers, but ultimately, it's a fantastic tool to be able to get fresh food in areas that, that don't have a lot of it. We have a big focus on community at Square Roots, and we like to engage with all of our kind of neighboring community. And so we really try to work with kind of all of our customers, or kind of any touch points that we have, to see how we can work on our product to make it accessible from a price perspective as well.
We have a lot of work to do in that regard too. So regardless of how you feel about meat eating, meat is a very expensive and resource intensive thing to produce, and it's reasonable to assume that as the years go on, it's going to become even more so, and those additional few billions of people who are going to be joining the planet in the next few decades are very likely going to have an appetite for meat as well, and it's becoming kind of this class issue even just today. So the hope is that it's not true right now, but cellular agriculture will someday be a way of providing meat and protein that is affordable to everybody.
And if I can just add, when I was at a really great conference by New Harvest last fall, there was a Japanese actor, I can't remember the Shojan Lead project. And his whole outlook is actually seeing how he can put that in the hands of the junior high students. So he showed us all of these different videos of junior high students being able to sort of create their own meat at home. Well, I don't understand all of it personally, but it just goes to show that not only is the science currently in terms of actually being able to produce in mass, so it's something that could be affordable, but also putting it in people's own hands to actually produce themselves.
Thank you so much. And so now we're really excited to have a conclusion keynote by Cyrielle Hariel, who's a writer, author in both radio and written.
A journalist from Paris. I work for radio, I have a TV show, I have a radio show. I wrote my first book this year, and I'm also a TEDx speaker. And I have a presentation to share with you my vision of a world about change makers, and especially with the food chain vision. In the food chain, it's so easy to be a change maker. There is many solutions. Choose local food, organic food, eat vegetarian more often that you can, of course. It's just a win-win philosophy for our planet, especially for Earth, for humankind. It's better for soil, for forest. You can struggle against deforestation because, cattle farming is our enemy, yes. It's good for our biodiversity. Sorry for my English, I'm a little bit stressed, but it's very good for our biodiversity because we are interdependent with animals, and of course, it's good for our health. Food is life, food is nature, and food is our future. And there is many French makers are innovating, and I want to give you some examples. Who do you know Yuka, the application? Hi! Are you French? Yuka is an app which scans the barcode of more than 200,000 food products in France. There are 3 quick criteria like this, okay? Nutrition, additives, and organic labels. There are 4 colors, code colors, red, orange, and 2 different green. Actually, there are more than 2 million people in France. They are using this app. And I love, because I speak with the founder, it's called Julie Chapon. And they told me, yes, my application is very good, and I'm so happy to continue this startup because many people write to me and they told me that they changed their food behavior, thank Yuka. And moreover, brands change recipes. They change recipes, they put less sugar, additives, and salt, just thanks an app. Let's talk about now la marmite bretonne. Do you know Bretagne, Britain in France? Brittany, Bretagne. You want to learn French? Bretagne. Who do you know this brand, La Marmite Bretonne? It's a very new startup. I love this. They all sold the products is 100% made in Britain. And the innovation, it thanks a flash code. They want to struggle with transparency. When thanks to your flash code, you know exactly the origin of each product and exactly the name of the gardeners in Brittany. It's local, it's direct food, it's organic. There are more 35 references of soups or mashed potatoes. In 2017, they sold more than 45,000 jars. And this year, they want to sell more than 100,000 jars. Okay, France is smaller than US, but it's a big number for us. All right? Who drinks coffee in this room? Who knows this brand? Araku Coffee. Yes, nobody. Araku Coffee, I talk about them on TV, on my radio station. I love this, you should taste. So trust me. It's biodynamic coffee. Voilà. Biodynamic coffee. It's from India. And it's fair trade because they've got the Max Havelaar labels. And through this label, they help small Indian farms. And with these benefits, these 10,000 farmers have now on their land hospitals and schools for their children. And I love this innovation about the coffee capsules. They are biodegradable and compostable in 23 weeks in the soil of your garden. Yes, you can love that. And do you know that we owe 70% of our food thanks to small farms in the world that represent more than 1 billion people? And you know that the majority of these small farmers are women. Do you know that the first victims of climate change are women? Do you know who got the solution against climate change? Women. And for example, just a little story in Ethiopia. I went there a few months ago with the search engine Ecosia, and I saw with my eyes, my little eye, that plant trees change the world. Like said the Nobel Peace Prize, the African woman Wangari Maathai. And guess who plant trees? Women. So it's just necessary to empower women, to empower little girls, to avoid them to, for example, get the water for the family because they need to go to school, all right? We agree? And of course, I am in America. I love your country, not your president, but I love your change makers. A few months ago, I went to Chicago. Who knows Growing Home? I mean, hey, journalists! Who knows this Growing Home startup? Nobody? Yes! French girl with inspiring change makers. I love this because it is a social business farm who exists for over a decade. The baseline is everyone deserves to have a good job and everyone deserves to eat well. Growing Home helps people with employment barriers. Barriers, sorry. They work with a population that needs support and give them the skills and training they need to become ready to find a job. And these people are former captives, prostitutes, and homeless people. They believe that urban agriculture combined with local food enterprise company can be a catalyst for change. I love this because since their start, so a decade ago, they helped hundreds and hundreds vulnerable people in Chicago, thanks urban farms. So all these people know how to be gardeners, and they sell their organic food on Chicago markets. It just win-win. I love it. It was unbelievable. So this is talk about change makers in food innovation, but I'm not specialized about food. I make many change makers in many subjects with spiritual, inspiring people like Dalai Lama. I met your former governor, Aranda to talk about the NGO called Air 20 at the One Planet Summit a few months ago. Well, I spent my life meeting these people. These people, through their ideas, are change makers. According to you, why these men and women are changing the world? Because they create jobs, they inspire, and sometimes they create jobs with vulnerable people like former captives. They produce organic food, a double benefit for our health and our planet. And they all have a long-term vision for world because they believe in humankind. It's not like our French president said, make our planet great again. Sorry, Mr. Emmanuel Macron, I disagree with you. Our common home, our planet is fine. It's more than 4 billion years old. It's surviving, but not necessarily us humans, okay? Because, like said Ban Ki-moon 3 years ago, there is no planet B. Elon Musk is not work so fast to be on Mars. And the second reason why am I here? Because I believe in resilience. Yeah, because I made a heart pick with all these people because I forgot to tell you, but I had a congenital heart problem disease 4 years ago. Now it's fine. I have an umbrella in my heart, so that's why I am the blonde journalist who make heart on social media for I think 3 years now. So I know what is resilience, but you too. So I believe in resilience because nature is resilience, and I believe especially in humans' resilience. Because with our diversity, like nature, because it's clever, we can innovate to live in a sustainable world. So, to finish, to conclude, make our planet and food great again. Because you know what? Yes, we can. Thank you.